Hello there, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan, and I've been accused of being very biased about the Jedi Order. I've made many videos that intricately detail the many failures of this monastic organization. I've criticized Yogurt's leadership and his decision to stay in power for so long. I've talked about the hypocrisy of the Jedi and their fear-based ideology. I mean, the truth is I do have a tendency to go after holier-than-thou types, these infallible gods that are just perfect. I don't believe in perfection. I think there's always something that smells bad when someone presents themselves as perfect. But I think you guys are onto something. I think I am being a little bit too harsh with the Jedi Order. There are a lot of redeeming qualities about these guys, and I've always said I'd much rather have a Jedi as a neighbor rather than some asshat Sith Lord who's always stealing my packages and, turning my lawn yellow because he's sucking all of the life out of the grass. And more importantly, while I do criticize the Jedi a lot, I rarely ever offer solutions for the problems that I point out. Criticism that's not constructive is just basically you ripping on someone at the end of the day. And the Jedi are easy targets, potato, and that's not what I'm about. So here I am today trying to make amends by pointing out a way a Jedi could fix, all of their problems essentially. I mean, what is the Jedi's greatest weakness? Is it their lack of flexibility from an ideological standpoint? Is it their fear of the unknown or their obsession with destroying the Sith? Well, I would argue that these are some pretty relatable and human shortcomings to have. But by themselves, these weaknesses are just symptoms of a much larger problem with the Jedi Order. And that is the fact that from day one, the Jedi were just always allowed to do whatever they wanted. There were very few checks and balances put in their way. I mean, you could argue that the Sith and their own empire eventually manifested into a sort of competing power, but even then they were more focused on killing the Jedi, which really isn't all that helpful, or the type of checks and balances I'm talking about. The type that creates long-term stable growth. The type of hatred the Sith brought to the game was just far too destructive to be constructive for the Jedi and made them worse as an organization, not better. No, what the Jedi needed was a third-party organization that could regulate their excesses, place boundaries on what the Jedi could or couldn't do, which I think would make the galaxy a much safer place, not only for the regular folks, but also for the Jedi themselves as well. Speaking of making the galaxy a safer place, what better way to protect yourself from the Jedi's excesses than by using one of their weapons, these lightsabers. Thanks to our sponsor for today's video, autonomy.com. I'll show you guys how you can get one of these guys for free. This, by the way, is a replica of Obi-Wan Kenobi's first lightsaber. It's called the First Dawn. Pretty cool. All you guys have to do is take autonomy.com's Star Wars quiz, which will come online on their Instagram and TikTok on February 20th at 10 a.m. Central Time. This quiz will be up for 24 hours. All participants who demonstrate that they're worthy by scoring over 80 on this Star Wars quiz, which honestly should be easy if you watch lore videos on this channel, will be entered into an online drawing where they can win a lightsaber of their choice, like this guy, the Night Reaper. So guys, mark it down on your calendar, February 20th at 10 a.m. Central Time. For more information about this giveaway and how the drawing works, check out the description down below. We'll link autonomy.com's Instagram and TikTok where the contest will take place. And even if you guys don't win one of these lightsabers, you can still use our promo code VAL15 to get free shipping at checkout. Well, thank you for your patience, good luck, and on to the rest of the video. The Jedi were basically free to do whatever the hell they wanted. They were accountable to no one. And you would think that's a good idea, right? I mean, I think all of us have thought not having any checks and balances on our own lives is a good idea at one point in our lives. You think that when you're a kid being scolded by your parents, or when you're in school being yelled at by one of your teachers, or when you're so smashed that you pissed yourself and a cop is putting you in cuffs for drinking and driving. F the police, right? No, it's not that simple. You see, when you get older and when you get your car out of that tree, you'll begin to understand that these people, these barriers, these restrictions all have a purpose. These things are kind of necessary to teach us how to regulate before we understand how to self-regulate. At an individual level, most of us need some structure, some rules, especially when we're really young and we don't really understand the concept of death or consequences. I mean, a person without limits is a danger to not only society, but to themselves as well. And when it's not just an individual, but an entire organization of Force users like the Jedi Order, limits become even more important. And that was something the Jedi always lacked. I mean, if you look at the ancient history of how, the Jedi and the Republic first met, it's actually a very informal meeting. The Jedi sort of just became the unofficial defenders of the galaxy, and the Republic more or less was okay with that happening, especially after the appearance of the Jedi's much less chilled out offspring, the Sith Empire. In Legends, the Old Republic did things like grant the Jedi prime real estate on Coruscant to build a new Jedi temple in order to attract the Jedi to become defenders of the Republic. And so right off the bat, the power balance and dynamics between the Jedi and the Republic were kind of off. I mean, how could you expect the Jedi to respect your government if you don't even respect or love yourself? I mean, the Republic should have made the Jedi at least work a little bit before giving them all that prime real estate. And it was because of this incessant groveling from the Republic, this desperation, that the Jedi were never really forced to sign any kind of treaty or kind of create some kind of formal structure that would incorporate them into the Republic's federal government. And so the Jedi were allowed to do basically whatever they wanted. And this kind of worked for the Jedi because they weren't really supposed to be a political organization, but ultimately this lack of formal definition of what the Jedi was and what role they had in the Republic would ultimately really hurt them. And one of the things that really hurt the Jedi was just the public perception of the Jedi. No one really understood what their role in the galaxy was. No one really understood how they were funded either. Were they given a huge tax abatement for their Jedi temple and forced to raise their own funds, or were the Jedi Knights and their operations directly funded by the Republic's treasury? And from what I've seen, the Jedi were really capable of building up assets and properties and general wealth. I mean, this was not a poor organization, but no one really knows exactly how the Jedi got their funds. And it's kind of funny that no one ever asked, because the Jedi are clearly rich and have access to some state-of-the-art ships and technology. They also had a monopoly over the kyber crystal mining and research industry in the galaxy as well. I mean, this much power and control, even paired with the best of intentions and discipline, will ultimately lead to corruption if not kept in check. And it's just the natural course of things. Now, it'd be perfectly fine for the Republic to be funding the Jedi if the Jedi actually reported to the Chancellor's office or some other kind of command structure within the Republic, but that just wasn't the case. Instead, the opposite happened. The Jedi were not beholden to the Republic's law or the orders of the Chancellor of the Republic. They were allowed to make independent decisions on their own. For instance, when the Jedi Padawan Ahsoka Tano is framed for the Jedi Temple bombing, Emperor Palpatine and Will of Tarkin want to try her in a military tribunal because she is technically a commissioned officer within the Grand Army of the Republic. But because Ahsoka was a Jedi, she had to first be expelled from the Jedi Order before she could be summoned by a military tribunal. So yeah, the Republic basically allowed the Jedi to self-police, which is never a good idea. There's definitely going to be some conflict of interest. Now, the Jedi would expel Ahsoka to avoid looking like they were practicing favoritism for one of their own members, but the point is, they didn't really need to do it. They could have just held their own trial and then declared that Ahsoka was free and continue to protect her from the Republic's judicial system. Societal pressure and public opinion, which affect even the most authoritarian regimes, are what really kept the Jedi honest. As a matter of fact, the whole situation was a bit awkward thanks to the structure of the Jedi Order. Had there already been an independent third-party monitor, the Jedi would have never needed to hastily kick Ahsoka out of the Jedi, which would lead to more problems down the road. What the Jedi needed was a lot more than just the lifting of special privileges and legal protections. They actually needed a specially trained organization that could keep them in check. The Jedi and the Sith were uber powerful. They could manipulate their environment in ways that seemed almost magical, and it terrified people. Now, one of the last decent games that BioWare made was a game known as Dragon Age. It was like a fantasy RPG style game. In the game, you had mages and sorcerers who tapped into chaotic energy that could oftentimes summon demons and other foul creatures. These magical wielding people were feared, and so another faction known as the Templars would be created to watch over these users of magic. Now, many of these mages understood just how dangerous of a game they were playing, and so a lot of them actually welcomed the Templars with open arms. These magical individuals understood better than most what happens to their kind when one of them starts ruining it for everyone else by opening a portal to a demonic dimension. And the Templars weren't just like rent-a-cops. These were serious people who trained all their lives specifically to counter magic users. Now, the Jedi technically did have Temple Guardians, who, like the Templars, were supposed to guard the Order from rogue Jedi and Darksiders. But they were never an independent force, and they were actually closely connected to the Jedi Temple. And even then, some of these guys were just not to be trusted. I mean, the Grand Inquisitor used to be a Jedi Guardian. No, what I'm talking about is a purpose-built organization, a third-party organization that was fully equipped to handle all of the dangerous abilities that the Jedi had. These individuals would be resistant to Force persuasion, armed with flamethrowers, stun blasters, shotguns, and other things that can get through a Jedi's lightsaber defenses. Heck, while you're at it, maybe even throw in some Cortosis weapons and armor that can short a lightsaber on contact, or maybe even get some Beskar, which is indestructible. I mean, there's a solution for you if you think about it. Take whatever the Mandalorians are left in the galaxy and hire them to keep the Jedi in check. I mean, these guys essentially evolved alongside the Jedi. Why do you think their armor is so overkill? And why do you think their armor has so many weapons that are great at messing up a Jedi? It's because these warriors spent generations upon generations trying to figure out how to defeat the Jedi. Now, if the Jedi were smart, they would actually want the federal government to regulate them, just like all those crypto bros in their exchanges. They all want regulation. And that's because regulation and attempts to balance things also lends a certain amount of legitimacy to the organization it's being applied to. It makes the Jedi Order seem like a less out of control organization. Having a bunch of Mandalorians breathe down the Jedi's backs would also present new dilemmas and challenges that meant that the Jedi would have to think of new ways of doing things. I mean, one of the biggest problems with the Jedi by the time of the Clone Wars was that they basically were just going through the motions. They had become stagnant as an order. There were no challenges, no real drama that would shake up the Jedi Order and force them to make the changes necessary to survive. No one told the Jedi no, so they pretty much could do whatever they wanted. It's for that reason the Jedi never thought twice about joining the Grand Army of the Republic and serving in Palpatine's war. The Jedi also never thought about the consequences of storming the Supreme Chancellor's office and arresting him without the consensus of at least the Senate or the military. These are the bold actions of an organization which is just not used to hearing no from other people. So there you have it, guys. That is what I think would have saved the Jedi Order from a lot of its shortfalls. An organization, perhaps full of Mandalorians, that kept them in check and made sure that when someone went to the dark side, they would be dealt with. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below. My name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy.